Every community, to be considered as such, has its own laws, but few can claim to have preserved them for so long. In the small Republic of San Marino, the ancient statutes are more than just an old code. They are the thread that links the first experiments in medieval self-government to today's republic. They are a document that continues to live on, not only in memory, but also in law, as we will see in the story we're about to tell you in this fourth episode of The Oldest Republic. See you right after the theme song. Welcome to The Oldest Republic. I'm Federica. Join me in this adventure. Enjoy the episode. The word statute comes from the Latin statutum, meaning what has been established. After all, every rule is a decision that brings order to the life of a community. But who establishes these rules? And why? It was only in the Middle Ages, around the 11th century, that communities of citizens began to adopt actual statutes, written collections of rules that set down customs, rights, and duties in writing. They emerged during a period of profound change, after the end of the Carolingian dynasty, when political unity was crumbling and local lords behaved like sovereigns, giving rise to numerous provincial laws that varied from region to region. Meanwhile, Italian cities were growing, trade, crafts, and urban life were developing, and it was in this context that municipalities arose, with their institutions and first attempts at self-government. But to govern, of course, laws are needed, and so municipal statutes were created. These collections combined Roman law, canon law, local customs, and sometimes even Lombard laws. At first, they merely put the rules already followed into writing, but then, thanks to the work of the statute makers, educated citizens tasked with drafting them, they became powerful instruments in the hands of the municipality. Even the small community of San Marino went in this direction. Bodies such as the Arengo, the Senate, and the Council were established. These were all composed of citizens, all with a role in collective decision-making. The statutes of that time regulated every aspect of life: institutions, disputes, trade, property, agriculture, civil and military obligations, but above all, they represented a departure from imperial and ecclesiastical power. The municipalities claimed autonomy. It must be said that this autonomy was anything but obvious. At the Diet of Roncaglia of 1158, a general assembly of the nobles and ecclesiasts of the Holy Roman Empire, Italian municipalities defended the right to legislate, but the emperor refused to accept this. It was only with the Peace of Constance, after 25 years of bitter struggle, that the empire officially recognized the municipalities' right to have their own laws and magistrates, even though the statutes still had to be formally approved by the emperor. These statutes, which were almost always written in Latin, became valuable items. They were bound in wood, chained to the benches of public buildings, to be consulted by everyone, but without being removed, hence the name chained codices. In the 16th century, with the rise of absolute monarchies, legislative power returned to the princes, but the statutes continued to exist, albeit in a reduced form, until the unification of Italy. Nevertheless, in a small corner of Europe, there is a statute that is still in force, which has survived over the centuries. As you will have guessed, we are obviously talking about the Statutes of the Republic of San Marino. The Statutes of San Marino that we know today, dating back to 1600, are the final chapter in a long history of reforms, amendment, and rewritings, and even though today they have mainly symbolic value, they remain in force only for certain civil and procedural rules. They are still one of the pillars of San Marino's legal memory. But let's start from the beginning. As we saw in the first episode of the podcast, San Marino had its own pieve, which we are certain had already been built at least by 951 and, in 1069, was already part of the Diocese of Montefeltro. It was precisely through the ecclesiastical framework that the first forms of self-government began to emerge. This was no coincidence. The Church played a fundamental role in the emergence of free municipalities. In the case of San Marino, it was perhaps a Guelph bishop named Giovanni who encouraged the establishment of the municipality. In 1254, the first official reference to the Statutes of San Marino appeared in a judicial document, but a year earlier another document had imposed the payment of a debt beyond the term provided for in the statute, a sign that these rules were already known, even if perhaps they had not yet been put in writing. As you may have noticed, we have often used the word perhaps and will continue to do so, because the documents we have to substantiate the historical reconstruction of those years are rather incomplete. In any case, the first true organic collection of statutes dates back to the period between 1295 and 1302 and was called Liber Statutorum Communis Castri Sancti Marini, Book of Statutes of the Municipality of San Marino. It included civil, criminal, and public laws, but did not yet regulate institutional bodies in detail, and many decisions were still made by custom. The structure of the main institutions was fairly simple and, with a few obvious changes, has remained in place to this day. At that time, the Erengo was the assembly of all citizens, summoned by the ringing of a bell to decide on matters relating to war, taxes, and laws. To support it, the General Council was established, which was more streamlined and practical for handling technical and legislative issues. Leading the state were the captain and the defender. According to some, the captain had more power. According to others, they were symmetrical. Indeed, in the statutes, they are always mentioned together with identical powers, a truly collegial government. It should be noted that the captain and the defender later became the captain's regent, which is still the highest institution in the Republic of San Marino. In addition to them, other minor offices existed. The Massarius, a sort of treasurer, the Gualdari and the Extimatores, who managed the territory divided into Gualdarie, the administrative districts of the time. During the 14th century, San Marino statutes were expanded and better structured. This process started with a rather unsystematic collection compiled by Rizzo da Ventura, which brought together rules on justice, security, and administration. Meanwhile, the statute of the previous century continued to grow with additions written at the end of the code, approved by the Erengo, the council, or special committees. When there are too many additions, it is time to put things in order. A new text was drafted, divided into 3 books, including innovations such as the 6-month term of office for consuls. Private law remained subject to practice and ordinary law. Between the 14th and the 15th centuries, the annotations continued to accumulate. For the first time, there was a reference to a private law that was specific to San Marino. The procedures for electing the captains were reformed, and the captains' regents were required to report on their activities at the end of the term of office. Between the 15th and the 16th centuries, a new collection took shape, establishing the Council of the 12, which was perhaps the successor to an ancient limited council responsible for the most delicate decisions. In the 16th century, there were repeated calls for reform. Various commissions were called upon to bring together the laws in force, and a new version of the statutes was created, which remained valid until the end of the century. Certain rules, such as the prohibition on the immediate re-election of captain's regent, are still in force. And finally, we get to the year 600. On the 21st of September, the captain's regent presented a new and solemn collection to the council, Statuta Decreta Coordinamenta Illustris Republicae ac Perpetue Libertatis Terrae Sancti Marini, which here we will simply refer to as the Statutes of 1600. The collection was officially approved on the 8th of October, and this is the text that, albeit with amendments and repeals, has come down to us. It is a document that has accompanied the history of the Republic for over 400 years. The Statutes of 1600 represent the culmination of centuries of experience, reforms, and customs. The previous laws had grown little by little like a tree full of branches and grafts. With this new statute, however, it was decided to bring order. Everything was pruned, reorganized, and arranged in an organic manner. The text, written in Latin, is divided into 6 large books, each with dozens of chapters, and although today it is only relevant in a few civil areas, it remains one of the strongest symbols of San Marino's legal identity. It is worth seeing up close. The first book is the heart of the Constitution. It regulates the main bodies of the state, the Erengo, which now only has a formal role, the Great and General Council, defined as the absolute prince, the captain's regent, elected every 6 months by drawing lots from among the members of the Great and General Council, and the Council of the 12, with judicial duties. Alongside these, there were dozens of positions that no longer exist today: the public physician, the guardian of the fortresses, the prefect of the provisions, and so on. These constitute a highly detailed overview of the administrative organization of the time. This book also contains a fundamental principle: statutes can be amended by ordinary laws adopted by the Great and General Council. The amendments, known as reformationes, were sewn at the end of the volume. And when there were too many, a new statute was made. Chapter 31 also lists the sources of law: first, the statute and its amendment, then local customs, and finally, if this were not enough, ordinary law. The other 5 books deal with civil, criminal, procedural, administrative, and agricultural matters, offering a comprehensive overview of public and private life. Together, these 6 books are much more than a set of rules. They tell the story of how a small republic was able to build, codify, and pass on its way of life. From the second half of the 16th century onwards, San Marino adopted a completely original institutional form: a small collegiate principality governed by a council made up of the most influential families. This aristocratic system found its definitive expression in the Statute of 1600. That text clearly indicated the end of the leading role played by the Arengo, the ancient assembly of heads of families, in favor of the Prince Council, which from then on was renewed by cooptation, giving rise to 3 centuries of what was effectively an oligarchic political class. However, it is important to note that although the Arengo had no real powers, it was never abolished. It remained silent on the sidelines, like a seed waiting for the right moment to germinate. As we learned in the previous episode of the podcast, such moment arrived in 1906. On the 25th of March, the Arengo was convened for the first time in centuries, and the heads of families approved an epoch-making reform: the partial and periodic election of the Great and General Council, which thus ceased to be elected exclusively by cooptation. This was the first major step towards a true representative democracy. In addition to this, the 20th century brought many changes, and with the exception of the 20-year period of authoritarian rule during fascism, San Marino was increasingly oriented towards the consolidation of democratic institutions. The turning point came in 1974 with the declaration of the citizen rights and fundamental principles of San Marino legal system, a sort of modern constitution. But even in this case, the Statutes of 1600 did not disappear. It continued to apply where it had not been expressly superseded, especially in civil and administrative law. It was only in 2002, with a profound constitutional review, that most of the public law provisions contained in the statute were definitively repealed. The Great Code of 1600 is still here. It is no longer at the center of political life, but it is a subsidiary source in civil and procedural matters. And, above all, it is a symbol of the Republic's extraordinary legal and institutional continuity. The statute's long history, marked by rewritings and reforms, shows us how communities are built over time, with words, rules, and a shared sense of living together. And it is precisely relationships and communities that we will be discussing in the next episode. We will delve into the Republic's foreign policy, discovering how San Marino has managed, with prudence and diplomacy, to defend its independence in a world dominated by giants. So stay tuned to the oldest republic. Thank you very much for listening, and until next time, goodbye.